You're scrolling through your phone at night and suddenly you see it. A former classmate just bought a house. A colleague got promoted. A friend is on their third vacation this year. And just like that, something shifts inside you. That quiet feeling that maybe you're falling behind, that perhaps you're not doing enough. This isn't weakness. This is human nature. And understanding why we compare ourselves to others might be one of the most important insights into our own minds. Psychology suggests that comparison isn't something we choose to do. It's wired into how we understand ourselves. Back in 1954, a psychologist named Leon Festinger proposed something called social comparison theory. His research indicated that humans have a fundamental drive to evaluate themselves. And when objective measures aren't available, we look sideways at the people around us. We measure our progress, our worth, our success against others because it gives us a reference point. Without it, we'd be floating in uncertainty, never quite sure if we're doing well or poorly. But here's where it gets interesting. Not all comparisons work the same way. Research has identified 3 distinct types. Upward comparison happens when we look at people we perceive as better off, more successful, or further ahead. This is the comparison that often stings the most. Then there's downward comparison, where we look at those we perceive as worse off than ourselves. Studies show this can temporarily boost self-esteem, though the effect is often short-lived and can carry its own complications. Finally, there's lateral comparison, where we measure ourselves against perceived equals. This type often feels the most urgent because the gap seems closable. The difference feels personal. What's fascinating is that our brains didn't develop this mechanism to torture us. From an evolutionary perspective, social comparison served a survival function. Our ancestors needed to know where they stood in their social group. Were they respected? Could they access resources? Were they attractive potential partners? These weren't vanity questions. They were survival questions. The person who could accurately assess their social standing could adjust their behavior accordingly, form better alliances, and ultimately survive and reproduce more successfully. So if comparison is natural, why does it feel so painful in modern life? The answer lies in how dramatically our environment has changed while our psychological mechanisms have remained largely the same. Our ancestors compared themselves to maybe 50 to 150 people in their immediate tribe or village. Today, we compare ourselves to thousands, even millions of people through social media, news, entertainment, and our expanded social and professional networks. Research indicates that comparison intensifies during periods of uncertainty. When we're unsure about our abilities, our progress, or our decisions, we instinctively look for external validation. A person starting a new job compares their performance to colleagues because they lack internal metrics for success yet. Someone entering their 30s might suddenly become hyper-aware of friends getting married or having children because society has created implicit timelines that generate uncertainty about personal choices. The workplace has become a particularly fertile ground for comparison. Organizations often use relative performance metrics, rankings, and visible reward systems. When one colleague receives a promotion, others inevitably measure themselves against that person. When salary information becomes known, either formally or through informal conversation, it creates immediate comparison points. Psychology suggests that these comparisons can motivate performance, but they can also create persistent dissatisfaction, even among high achievers who are objectively successful by any reasonable standard. Social media has fundamentally altered the frequency and intensity of social comparison. Studies conducted over the past decade consistently show correlations between social media use and decreased life satisfaction, with social comparison identified as a key mediating factor. The issue isn't just that we see others' successes. It's that we see highly curated versions of others' lives multiple times per day. We're exposed to engagement announcements, vacation photos, career milestones, and achievement celebrations in a constant stream. Our brains process each of these as comparison data, even when we consciously know we're seeing edited highlights. Consider how this plays out in everyday situations. 2 colleagues start at the same company on the same day. 3 years later, one receives a promotion. The other, who has been performing well and receiving positive feedback, suddenly feels inadequate. The objective facts haven't changed. They're still competent, still valued, still progressing. But the comparison has reframed their entire experience. What was satisfaction becomes disappointment. What was progress becomes stagnation. The reference point shifted, and with it, their entire perception of their situation. Or take the common experience of attending a high school or college reunion. People often report feeling anxious before these events, and research suggests it's largely due to anticipated social comparison. They wonder how their lives will measure up. Have they achieved enough? Do they look successful? The reunion itself often reinforces these comparisons, as conversations naturally drift toward accomplishments, careers, families, and lifestyles. Interestingly, studies show that people tend to overestimate how much others are judging them, and underestimate how much others are worried about being judged themselves. Parenting represents another domain where comparison flourishes. Parents compare their children's developmental milestones, academic performance, and social skills. They compare their parenting approaches, the activities they provide, the opportunities they create. Often observed behavior includes parents feeling inadequate when seeing other children excel in areas where their own children struggle, or when observing parenting styles that seem more patient, more creative, or more effective than their own. This comparison can drive parents to provide better opportunities for their children, but it can also create unnecessary anxiety and pressure on both parents and children. Romantic relationships aren't immune either. People compare their relationships to those of friends, to portrayals in media, to their own past relationships. They measure frequency of conflict, expressions of affection, lifestyle compatibility, and future goals against perceived standards. Someone in a stable, loving relationship might suddenly feel dissatisfied after seeing a friend's partner plan an elaborate surprise or after seeing relationship content online that portrays constant romance and adventure. The comparison creates a gap between reality and expectation, even when the reality was previously satisfying. Psychology suggests that comparison isn't inherently harmful. In some contexts, it genuinely serves us well. Upward comparison can inspire motivation. Seeing someone achieve something we desire can make that achievement feel possible. It can clarify goals and energize effort. Research in educational settings shows that students who compare themselves to slightly better performing peers often show improved performance themselves. The key word is slightly. When the gap feels achievable, comparison can fuel healthy ambition. Comparison can also facilitate realistic self-assessment. Without external reference points, we might develop inflated or deflated views of our abilities. A person who believes they're an excellent public speaker might benefit from watching skilled communicators and recognizing areas for improvement. Someone who thinks they're terrible at creative work might discover through comparison that their skills are actually quite developed. The comparison provides calibration. However, research consistently documents negative patterns when comparison becomes chronic or when the gaps feel insurmountable. Studies show that frequent social comparison is associated with increased anxiety, depression, and lower self-esteem. The mechanism appears to operate through a few key pathways. First, comparison often generates feelings of inadequacy and envy. These emotions are uncomfortable and can become persistent when comparison is constant. Second, comparison can distort self-perception. People begin to define themselves through relative standing rather than absolute qualities or personal values. Success becomes meaningful only in comparison, never in itself. The comparison trap creates a particularly troubling cycle. Someone compares themselves unfavorably, which creates negative emotions. To cope with these emotions, they might increase their efforts to achieve, but they also become more sensitive to others' achievements, leading to more frequent and painful comparisons. The goalposts continuously move because they're defined by others, not by personal satisfaction or fulfillment. Psychology suggests this is why some highly successful people report persistent feelings of inadequacy. Their absolute achievements are impressive, but their comparison frame keeps them perpetually behind. Here's a critical insight that research emphasizes repeatedly. When we compare ourselves to others, we're We're almost always working with incomplete and biased information. We see others' results without seeing their process. We see their successes without seeing their failures, their setbacks, their struggles, or their advantages. This creates what psychologists call an availability bias. The information that's available to us, the highlights and achievements, disproportionately influences our judgment. Consider the colleague who got promoted. What we see is the promotion. What we might not see is the 60-hour work weeks, the sacrificed personal time, the family strain, or the health issues that accompanied that achievement. We might not know about the 3 previous attempts at promotion that failed, or the mentorship relationship that made the difference, or the specific organizational needs that created the opportunity. We're comparing our complete, messy, complicated reality to a single visible outcome. Social media amplifies this information problem dramatically. People curate their online presence to emphasize positive experiences and achievements. Studies analyzing social media content consistently find that posts skew heavily toward positive self-presentation. We're not seeing the argument that happened before the smiling couple photo. We're not seeing the financial stress behind the vacation pictures. We're not seeing the rejection and failure that preceded the career announcement. Our brains process these images and updates as representative of others' lives, and then we compare our unfiltered reality to these filtered presentations. There's also the issue of different starting points and circumstances. Often observed patterns show that people frequently compare outcomes while ignoring context. Someone who grew up in poverty and worked their way to a stable middle-class life might compare themselves unfavorably to someone who inherited wealth and connections. The comparison focuses on current status, not on the distance traveled or the obstacles overcome. Psychology suggests that when we account for context, the comparison often shifts dramatically. Understanding the psychology of comparison opens possibilities for a different relationship with it. Research indicates that awareness itself changes the experience. When people recognize that they're engaging in social comparison and understand the biases involved, the emotional impact often decreases. They can observe the comparison thought without being consumed by it. One useful reframing is to view comparison as information rather than judgment. Instead of asking, "Am I as good as them?" the question becomes, "What can I learn from observing this?" This shifts comparison from a self-esteem evaluation to a learning opportunity. Someone seeing a colleague's successful presentation might notice specific techniques, preparation strategies, or communication styles worth adopting, rather than simply feeling inadequate about their own skills. Another insight involves recognizing personal values and individual paths. Psychology suggests that comparison causes the most distress when we're measuring ourselves against others' definitions of success rather than our own. A person who values work-life balance might compare themselves unfavorably to someone with a high-powered career, forgetting that they've made different choices based on different priorities. When comparison is filtered through personal values, it becomes less universal and more contextual. Not everyone is running the same race, and not everyone defines winning the same way. Research also emphasizes the importance of identifying personal comparison triggers. Some people are most sensitive to career comparisons. Others react strongly to relationship milestones or physical appearance comparisons. Understanding individual patterns allows for more intentional management of comparison tendencies. If someone knows that social media triggers painful comparison, they can adjust their usage or curate their feed more carefully. If someone knows that certain social situations increase comparison, they can prepare mentally or limit exposure when necessary. Social comparison isn't a flaw in human psychology. It's a feature, one that helped our ancestors navigate complex social environments and continues to provide useful information today. The challenge isn't to eliminate comparison, but to develop a more sophisticated relationship with it. To recognize when it's happening, to understand the incomplete information we're working with, to question whose standards we're applying, and to remember that lives are far more complex than the visible markers we use for comparison. The person who seems to have everything figured out is likely comparing themselves to someone else and feeling behind. The colleague who just achieved something impressive has their own doubts and insecurities. Everyone is running their own race while occasionally glancing sideways, wondering if they're keeping pace. Understanding this doesn't make comparison disappear, but it can soften its edges. It can create space between the comparison thought and the emotional reaction. And in that space, there's room for a more compassionate, more accurate view of ourselves and others. This is something we're all navigating. What's your experience with comparison? Do you notice certain triggers that make it more intense? How do you handle those moments when comparison feels overwhelming? The comment section is open for genuine conversation. If this analysis resonated with you, consider sharing it with someone who might benefit from this perspective. And if you want more content exploring human behavior and psychology, you know what to do. Thanks for watching.